Montana Territory, June 1882. The wind howled high on the cliff's edge, and the sky above the Bitterroot Mountains turned a sharp, metallic gray. Rain had not yet come, but it was close. You could taste it. And standing near the jagged drop, with her back to the abyss, Rhea Franklin stared down the barrel of a man's rage. "You think someone's gonna ride up and save you?" he growled, his hand clenched tight around her wrist. "You think anyone cares what happens to a widow with no land and no men to speak for her?" Rhea didn't move. She didn't cry. Her heart pounded like a war drum in her chest, but her eyes stayed sharp and steady. "Let go of me, Josiah. You have no right." Josiah Bram, the banker's oldest son, stepped closer, boots scraping rock. "You should have married me when I asked. Your husband's been dead a year. His debts are my father's burden now. You think you'll get to keep that cabin? That land?" He yanked her forward, closer to the cliff's edge. A single hawk screeched overhead. Then came the voice, low, steady, sharp as a drawn knife. "Step away from her." Josiah turned. Rhea's breath caught. A man on horseback sat not 20 feet away. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, a rifle resting easy across the saddle horn. He looked like he had ridden through hell and halfway back, dust-covered, coat torn at the shoulder, his jaw dark with a few days' worth of beard. But his voice carried calm, like this wasn't his first time facing down a man ready to do something awful. "I said step away from her," the cowboy repeated, this time dismounting in one smooth motion. Josiah's hand twitched. "This ain't your business, stranger." "It is now," the cowboy said. He walked forward without hesitation, rifle still in hand but pointed low. "You got a choice here. Let her go, or I make you." Josiah hesitated. Then Rhea jerked her arm free and stumbled back, away from the edge. The cowboy moved between them in an instant, placing himself squarely in front of her. Josiah stepped back, fists clenched. "This is far from over." The cowboy's voice dropped. "No, it is over. You touch her again, I will bury you myself." Josiah spat near the ground, turned, and stalked off through the brush. The cowboy turned around, and his eyes met Rhea's for the first time. She recognized something in them, raw, unsettled pain trying hard to stay hidden. He tipped his hat once. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, though her knees trembled. "Yes. Thank you." He holstered his rifle. "Name's Hollis Vaughn. Rhea Franklin." He gave the faintest nod. "You live close?" "Cabin's just down the ridge. About a half-mile. Mind if I walk you there?" She hesitated. Then, "I would appreciate that." They walked in silence, the wind settling into a breeze now that the worst of it had passed. Rhea kept glancing at him from the side. He had the kind of presence that filled the space without saying much. She could see the lines around his eyes, the way he scanned the trees as they moved. A man used to watching his back. When her cabin came into view, small, weather-worn, and nestled near a patch of pine, Rhea slowed. "You can come in," she said, voice quiet. "At least for water." He nodded once. "Thank you." Inside, the cabin was plain but tidy. A stone hearth, a braided rug, and a few shelves lined with jars of dried herbs and beans. Rhea poured water into a tin cup and handed it to him. He drank, then looked at her. "That man. He bother you before?" "No," she said, setting down the pitcher. "Not like that. He's come around most of the year. Trying to pressure me sell the land, take a loan I cannot pay. He knows I am alone." Hollis leaned against the doorframe. "You got family?" "No. Just me now." He looked at her a moment longer. "You ever shoot a rifle?" She blinked. "Yes. My husband taught me. We used to hunt together." "You still got it?" She nodded. "Under the bed. Keep it close." "I will." He stepped back toward the door. "If he comes around again, send word to the sheriff. But if you cannot, I will be nearby a few days. Up in the woods north of here. Hunting elk." She followed him to the porch. Why did you help me? He turned to face her fully now. Because I saw what he was going to do. And I do not walk away from that. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. He tipped his hat. You take care, Rhea? Thank you, Hollis. He walked off into the trees. That night, she sat by the fire and stared at the empty chair across from her. She hadn't felt safe like that in a long time, not since her husband, Samuel, died from fever last autumn. Not since the neighbors stopped visiting and the debt collectors started circling. And that cowboy Hollis, he had not looked at her like she was broken. He had looked at her like she was worth standing in front of. She went to bed with the rifle by her side. The next morning, she stepped out onto her porch and found a skinned rabbit hanging from the post with a simple note pinned beside it. Thought you might need this. She smiled, the first real smile in months. Up in the ridge, Hollis cleaned his rifle and watched the cabin from a distance. He had not meant to stop. He had told himself he would pass through Montana quick, move south before the snow came. But now, he was not so sure. Something in her eyes, that calm steadiness even when her life hung on the edge, it stayed in his mind. And he found himself hoping he would see her again. 2 days passed before Rhea saw him again. She was kneeling in the garden behind her cabin, coaxing stubborn radishes from the soil. The earth was dry, and her hands ached from the work. When she looked up, Hollis was there, quiet as smoke, leaning slightly against the split rail fence, hat in hand, dust clinging to his boots. I brought you something, he said. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. You didn't have to. He stepped forward and held out a woven pouch, the kind trappers use for storing dried meat or herbs. Found some wild mint and yarrow near the creek bend. Thought maybe you'd know what to do with them. She took the pouch, letting her fingers graze his. I do. Thank you. He nodded once. Creek's down past the bluff west of here. Water's running clean. I haven't been that way in a long while. I could show you. If you wanted. She hesitated, then gave a small nod. Let me get my shawl. They walked side by side through the tall grass, her steps slower than his, but he matched her pace without comment. The trail narrowed near the edge of the trees, and the pine needles underfoot softened each step. How long have you been out here? She asked. Since late spring. He answered. Came through from Idaho after the snow melted. Thought I'd head east, then south. Haven't decided yet. You always move around. I do better that way. Less to lose. She glanced sideways at him. That how you stay safe? He gave a quiet shrug. Sometimes. The creek came into view, clear, shallow, and wrapping around a smooth bed of stones. The air was cooler here, and the scent of wet moss clung to everything. She knelt at the edge and dipped her fingers into the water. Colder than I expected. He crouched beside her. It's spring-fed. Won't warm much, even come July. They stayed like that for a while, not speaking. A single dragonfly skimmed the surface between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. There's more than just dead on that land. My husband. He buried something here. Not money. Just pieces of his life. Things he didn't want forgotten. Hollis didn't ask what. He only said, that's reason enough to keep it. She looked at him then, really looked. You don't ask many questions. I don't need much to understand a thing. She stood, wiping her hands on her skirt. Most folks want stories. They want to know why you're alone. I figure if you wanted to tell me, you would. She held his gaze a moment longer. You're different. He looked away, toward the sunlight breaking through the trees. Not sure that's a good thing. It might be. They walked back slowly. The sun sat lower now, casting long shadows across the grass. He stopped near the fence and pulled a folded cloth from his coat. Found this too, he said. Up by the ridge. Belonged to someone's camp, might be useful. She unfolded it. A sturdy length of canvas, worn but clean. I could use it for the roof eave. Keeps dripping when it rains. His eyes met hers. Then I'm glad I found it. She hesitated. Would you stay for supper? He shifted his weight. If you're sure. I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't. Inside, she lit the lamp while he washed in the basin. Her hands moved with quiet purpose peeling potatoes, slicing the last of the venison. She didn't speak, and neither did he. But the silence felt like something shared, not empty. As they ate, the light flickered across his face. The scar near his jaw caught the glow. How'd you get that? She asked. South of Cheyenne. Some years back. Man thought I was someone else. Were you? No. But I didn't convince him fast enough. She leaned back. And you still go on helping strangers? Not all of them. Just the ones I can't walk past. Her throat tightened. That's a rare thing. He set his fork down. What about you? Why stay here, when the world's pushing so hard to make you leave? This place was the first where I felt like I could breathe. Even after Samuel died, it still held pieces of peace. He didn't speak right away. Then, peace is worth fighting for. When he stood to leave, she walked him to the porch. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. If you ever need a hand with the roof, he said, I can come by tomorrow. She nodded once. I'd like that. He stepped down, boots crunching soft against the path. Then he paused and looked back. You sleep with the rifle close? Yes. Good. She watched him disappear into the trees, the lamplight behind her casting a long shadow on the porch floor. And for the first time in a long while, she felt something stir in her chest, a quiet knowing that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. By mid-June, the roof was patched, the garden rows were straighter, and Rhea had stopped locking the front door during daylight. Hollis came by most mornings, carrying something useful, a coil of rope, 2 iron nails, a flat stone he claimed was good for sharpening blades. He never stayed longer than needed, unless she asked him to. On the third Thursday she asked him to. He just finished splitting the last of the firewood when she stepped out with a basin of peeled apples. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and a loose strand of hair clung to her cheek. I've never had a hand for pies, she said, setting the basin on the porch rail. But I've a mind to try. He wiped his palms on his trousers. You need help? I need someone honest enough to say if it's terrible. I can do that. She gave him half a glance, a quiet agreement passing between them. Inside, the cabin was warm from the fire, and the scent of cinnamon drifted faintly beneath the smell of sap and pine that clung to him. He watched her crumble lard into flour, her hands quick and sure, though her brow furrowed more than once. You ever cook? She asked without looking up. Enough to keep myself fed. Mostly stew, jerky when I'm moving through. No one ever taught you. My mother died when I was small. After that, it was whatever the trail offered. She paused, her fingers still in the dough. That's a hard way to grow. He adjusted the tin cup on the table, his voice even. I didn't know anything else. She handed him the bowl. Here. Mix the apples with sugar and spices. His hands moved slowly, careful not to spill. You and your husband ever planned to leave this place? No. He'd been east before. Said he never wanted to see another city street. He liked the quiet here. Said it made his thoughts kinder. Hollis nodded, scooping the mixture into the waiting crust. That's a way of putting it, I understand. She took the pie to the hearth and set it in the cast iron oven. He watched her kneel near the coals, the firelight catching the edge of her cheekbone. You ever think about what comes after all this? She asked, still facing the flames. After what? The work. The waiting. The surviving. He leaned back in the chair, looking out the window to the ridge. I used to think I'd end up with a few acres somewhere. Maybe a horse that didn't try to throw me. But the years kept slipping past. She turned toward him, brushing soot from her knuckles. There's still time. Maybe. He paused. You think about it? She sat across from him, folding her hands. Most days I don't let myself. But lately. The pie finished baking just as the light outside dipped into gold. They ate it warm, straight from the tin. It was rough around the edges, the crust uneven, the filling sliding, but neither of them said a word about that. She poured him another cup of coffee, and this time, he didn't refuse. You ever been in a shootout? She asked, voice quiet. Once, he said. Nevada. Didn't last long. I was lucky. She nodded, turning her cup in her hands. You don't carry yourself like a man with a fast hand. I don't want to be one. Good. They sat for a long while after that, the light outside fading to blue. She didn't ask him to leave. He didn't offer to go. When she finally stood to light the lamp, he rose too, stepping near. Rhea. She looked up. If I stayed longer than I meant to, would that be all right? She didn't answer right away. Her fingers reached out slow, brushed the cuff of his sleeve. Yes. He nodded, eyes steady on hers. Then I'll come tomorrow. She watched him step out into the dark, the sound of his boots soft on the grass. She didn't close the door behind him. Instead, she stood there, one hand on the frame, watching until the trees swallowed him whole. And for the first time since Samuel's death, she lit the second candle on the table and let it burn through the night. The next day dawned cool and pale, the sky washed clean by a night rain that had passed without thunder. Rhea rose early, her boots damp from the grass as she walked to the fence line with a bundle of washed linens slung over one shoulder. She pinned them with care, her fingers moving deliberately, pausing once when she heard footsteps behind her. I brought hinges, Hollis said, lifting a small burlap sack. Figured your root cellar door could use 'em. It sticks in the heat, she replied, motioning toward the slope behind the house. Been meaning to fix it. They descended the short hill together, the earth still soft underfoot. Hollis knelt to examine the warped frame, pulling a pocket knife to scrape away rot from the edge. Storm must have hit this corner hard, he muttered. It came through in March. Tore the chicken shed clean apart. I patched what I could. He glanced up at her, then back to the wood. You ever think about building something new? Not just fixing what's left. She folded her arms. You asking if I want to leave this place behind? No. I'm asking if staying means more than surviving. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she crouched beside him, peeling moss from the stones near the foundation. If I had help. Maybe. It's hard to picture more than what fits in a day's work. He fitted the first hinge and tested it. You've got more than you think. They worked until the sun edged past noon, and by the time they finished, the cellar opened smooth and clean. She dusted her hands and leaned back on her heels. You hungry? He stood, brushing dirt from his trousers. Always. She led him inside, where the table was already set with cold beans, a slice of salt pork, and the last of the early cornbread. He ate without hurry, and when she sat across from him, she didn't touch her plate. You've been sleeping close to the ridge, she said, watching him. I have. Then you know someone's been moving through the backwoods. His jaw flexed. I saw tracks 2 nights ago. Fresh boot prints, not yours. Campfire ash near the north bend. Could be a trapper. Could be Josiah. She set her cup down. He's not finished with me. No. But I am. He looked at her then, eyes steady. I'm done moving place to place, putting distance between myself and every good thing I find. I want to stay, Rhea. If you'll have me. She didn't look away. You know what that means. This land, this cabinet comes with weight. With trouble. I've carried worse. She reached across the table, laying her hand over his. Then stay. He turned his palm to catch hers fully, his fingers rough, warm. I will. That night she cleared a shelf beside the hearth, placing one of his folded shirts there without ceremony. He hung his coat by the door, boots beside hers. No one spoke of it. It was done. The next morning, they rose before the sun, set snares along the lower creek, and stacked kindling for the week ahead. She spoke of planting more squash. He asked where the soil drained best. It wasn't plans for someday, it was now. Later, as dusk settled, they stood by the porch rail, watching wind ripple through the grass below. You ever miss the trail? She asked. He shook his head. Not anymore. She leaned against him, her head brushing the edge of his shoulder. He didn't move, just rested his hand over hers where it gripped the rail. Behind them, the door to the cabin stood open, firelight flickering within. No words passed between them. None were needed. The long dark had lifted. The life ahead would be hard, but it would be shared. And in that quiet space between breath and promise, they stood together, unshaken. By early July, the trees along the ridge had thickened with green, and the creek ran slower, warm enough now to wade through without flinching. Hollis had traded his rifle for a set of timber tools, and most mornings were spent stripping bark from cedar poles or shaping beams beside the cabin, where the frame of a second lean-to had begun to rise. Rhea had drawn it out in chalk on a flat stone, her idea for a curing shed and a small workroom where she could dry herbs without smoke blackening the walls. One afternoon, while Hollis was fitting the crossbeam, she came up the slope from the creek carrying a bundle of wild mustard and tansy. Her skirts were damp at the hem, and her hands stained from roots she'd pulled. There's a settler family a few miles south, she said as she dropped the bundle near the door. New folks. Young. Their little girl's got a cough they can't shake. I said I'd come round tomorrow. He drove the last peg into the beam and straightened. You want me to ride with you? I do, she said. But not for protection. Just company. He gave a short nod and wiped his brow on his sleeve. Then I'll ready the mule cart tonight. They left before sunrise, the cart rocking gently as the trail curved through birch groves and across shallow gullies. Rhea sat beside him, her satchel tucked between her knees, humming low now and again, almost absently. Hollis didn't speak, but he glanced at her often, his gaze lingering on the way morning light caught in her hair. The family's cabin stood near a dry pasture, the roof still raw with new shingles. A young woman barely more than a girl stepped out holding a thin, pale child close to her chest. Rhea took the child without hesitation, her hands practiced steady. Hollis stayed near the cart, watching the horizon where dust plumed faintly in the distance, though no riders came. By the time they returned home, the sun had climbed high, and the wind had dried the sweat from their necks. Hollis helped her down from the cart, his hand resting around hers longer than necessary. She'll be all right, Rhea said, wiping her palms on her apron. You told the mother what to do. Steep the leaves 3 times a day. Keep her out of smoke and damp. He leaned against the porch rail. You always been good with healing? Since I was small. My father taught me plants, my mother taught me care. Samuel used to call it fixing what God forgot to finish. Hollis tilted his head. You ever think about teaching it? I used to, she said. But most folks don't trust a woman's hands unless they're folding laundry or stirring stew. He looked at her, serious now. I'd trust yours with anything. She met his gaze, then stepped closer. Would you? I already do. She reached for his collar, fingers brushing the edge of the scar beneath his jaw. Then marry me. He blinked once. You're certain? I've never been more. He didn't answer with words. He pulled her close, slow and careful, his hands resting against her back like she was something he'd been waiting half his life to hold. When he kissed her, it wasn't hurried. It was grounding, like a man putting his feet down in good soil. They wed beneath the cottonwoods 2 weeks later, with only the wind and the creek as witnesses. Rhea wore a dress she stitched from muslin saved years ago, and Hollis shaved for the first time since spring. He carved their names into the cedar beam of the new shed, just above the door. By late summer, the curing room hung thick with bundles of sage and lavender. The garden stretched wide across the back field, and a row of sunflowers rose taller than Rhea's shoulders. Hollis built a bench beneath them, where they sat most evenings after chores, her head resting against his shoulder as the sky turned to fire and then to ash. That fall, when sickness swept through the valley, Rhea rode out with her satchel, and Hollis went with her every time. He never said much, but he carried the sick children, lit fires in cold homes, hauled water from dry wells. People stopped calling her the widow and started calling her Mrs. Vaughn. One day in November, as frost edged the windows and smoke curled tight from the chimney, Rhea knelt in the kitchen, one hand pressed to her middle. She didn't speak at first. Just sat back on her heels and stared at the hearth. When Hollis came in from the woods, she stood and set the kettle on the stove. "We'll need to add a cradle to the shed," she said softly. He froze, his glove still in hand. "You're sure?" She turned to face him, her face calm and open. "Yes." He crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped his arms around her, resting his forehead to hers. "Then I'll build it strong." Winter settled in, but the cabin stayed warm. They spent the long nights reading old letters by lamplight, watching snow fall past the window, listening to the kettle hiss. Hollis carved a small horse from pine and tucked it on a shelf above the hearth. Rhea braided a blanket from wool scraps and stitched the edges with blue thread. Spring came slow and reluctant, but it came. And with it, a child dark-haired and healthy, with eyes shaped just like hers and a quietness that reminded them both of him. They named him Samuel. And in the quiet that followed, with the garden blooming again and the creek running strong, Rhea and Hollis built a life not from what they'd lost, but from what they chose each day to keep. Together. Always.